Hey there, and thanks for listening to this episode of Pop Culture Coram Deo. I wanted to give you guys a heads up about something special with this episode. I found A Quiet Place so interesting that I rushed home and asked for one of my favorite critics of story to go watch it and come back and talk to me about her thoughts on the film. So after you hear Jared and I wrap up our discussion of the movie, stay tuned because after that you'll hear my wife, Christy Wright, again, one of my favorite critics of storytelling, address her thoughts on A Quiet Place. And I think you're going to find it interesting as well. All right, enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pop Culture Coram Deo podcast. It has been a little while since we talked to you, but we hope you enjoyed our episode on March Madness. And we hope that that helps you enjoy March Madness maybe a little bit more as a Christian. Certainly an interesting tournament, lots of Cinderellas and drama. And so we're glad to have had a chance to kind of walk through that with you, but we're also glad to be back together now talking about new content. This is Jeff Wright, and I'm here with Jared Moore. Jared, my friend, how are you doing? It's been a while since we talked on the podcast.
Yes, sir. I'm doing well. Had a good week. Taught some PE yesterday at the kids' school, and head got burnt. I'm follically challenged. If our listeners have never seen me,
you're a blessed set of people who've never laid eyes on Jared Moore.
That's exactly right. You don't know what you're missing. I have a face for podcast.
We both have a face for podcasting.
I've got a head for podcast, evidently too. But yeah, man, I'm doing well. I'm excited. This movie was awesome.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, we're living in neighboring towns. So Jared and I can get together, infrequently, but more than we have for the past several years. We've been friends for a long time. This is the closest we've lived together in quite a bit of that time in our adult lives. So we got together last night for a 9:30 showing of A Quiet Place. And truth be told, I'm too old to do that. I realize that this is beyond my capacity as a 30-year-old guy with kids who get up at 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning.
Amen.
But man, I was riveted by that movie.
Oh yeah, it was awesome.
I went from maybe I should go home and go to bed to the edge of my seat. It was phenomenal.
It really was, man. Really was. Go ahead, brother.
I was just going to ask if we're ready to get started, but it sounds like you may have had something else to raise.
Yeah, I'm ready to get started.
Okay, so I just pulled a description of this movie from IMDb for those of you who are trying to think through whether or not you're going to watch this movie. So the summary of the film from IMDb is: a family is forced to live in silence while hiding from creatures that hunt by sound. Try to keep that minimalistic. We're very quickly going to get into spoiler territory, but that's what this movie is about. Jared, I want to ask you, the next thing on our normal docket is the conscience warning. What potentially may trouble consciences coming out of this movie?
I figure violence. It is a violent movie. Very intense. If you struggle with anxiety, it's full of scary situations, jump scares a lot, but also just some really, you say heart melting, right? Heart melting, especially us with children, right? Those, listeners, if you have children, especially young children, you're going to be able to resonate with the characters in this movie a lot, and you're going to resonate with the sorrow they feel and the joy they have as well.
Yeah, you're right. There is heart melting goodness here, but really early on in the movie, you get a piece that is super devastating emotionally. And yeah, particularly as a parent. I was sitting between you and my brother-in-law, who's several years younger than me. They've got young kids. And in that opening, moment of terror, he just put his hands on his head and I leaned over and I said, being a dad just changes the way you see this stuff, doesn't it? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. My wife hates any kind of horror movie built on scary kids or bad things happening to kids. And she's right. I don't think she's wrong on that. I have a little bit more of a stomach for it than she does. But yeah, this movie will rip on your heart pretty aggressively for sure. There's no foul language though. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting because this movie had plenty of, if that's part of your vocabulary, if you lived in this type of world, you would be saying a lot of bad words. If that was, if you talk like that, it would have been all over the place in this movie.
Yeah.
With people, things, I mean, jumping out, the horrendous things that happen. I mean,
And
yeah.
there's no inappropriate sexual content.
Mm-hmm.
Although, sexuality in the sense of being gendered beings is very much a part of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, inappropriate sexuality, nudity, anything like that. I mean, really, for the person out there who can handle violence
Mm-hmm.
and their conscience isn't offended by it, I say handle violence. I'm not saying you should be able to, as if that's aspirational. I'm just saying if you're the person who isn't offended by violence, this is one of the most wholesome movies I have seen outside of like movies particularly aimed at children in forever.
I think, I think it's even more so than Hostels. I think it may beat Hostels.
Yeah, in some ways, this is going to sound ludicrous to certain people, and it may be ludicrous, but in some ways, this is a more wholesome movie than like Beauty and the Beast and Coco,
Yep.
And I said it as a guy who liked those movies, but this one is rich with good stuff, and there's not a lot in there beyond creatures who eat people, which I realize how ridiculous that sounds, but beyond these creatures, there's not much in there that you would find objectionable, and there's going to be a ton, I think, Christians are going to say, I'm delighted to see that portrayed so well on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tweeted that, complementarianism's all over this movie, I believe.
Yeah,
and it's displayed rightly.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But, I think we're going to end up saying much more even than that about what's good here. Like, I don't want to reduce it to just egalitarian versus complementarian. That's very much at the core of it. But that's like, 1/5 of what's great about this movie.
Sure.
So just a few film notes. If you're not aware, John Krasinski, who most people know from the U.S. version of The Office, he played Jim Halpert, wrote, directed, and starred in this film. Now, I had thought going into this that he was the creative genius behind the story of this movie. That's actually not true. He encountered this film after it had already been developed by some writers who grew up out in the country, basically, and had been working on the script for quite some time. But when he read it, he found it super captivating as a parent. Apparently, it was the dynamics of parenthood that compelled him to participate in this project. The writers are Scott Beck and Brian Woods. He jumped in. He has a writing credit, so in some way he contributed to the plot. But nonetheless, he's, this is a John Krasinski film in really every sense of the word. And I think this is his third film. And, I think the best freshman film I ever saw was Jordan Peele's Get Out. But I will say, if this is Krasinski's third effort, the future's bright for him behind the camera, let alone whatever he does in front of it from here on out.
He's going to make, this movie's going to make a killing. Word of mouth. This movie, I predict it will be, I don't think it'll go as far as it and Get Out, but I think it'll be maybe third as far as horror movies.
That's entirely possible. The scope of people who are going to find this film appealing goes beyond so many of the divisions that we have in our current society. I really do think Christians are going to love this movie. I think non-Christians are going to love this movie. I think politically left people will love this movie. I think politically right people will love this movie. Every distinction you can come up with, there's something there that people can latch onto. Just a couple other notes about this. So Krasinski takes this film back home, or the script, his real life wife, Emily Blunt, reads it and asks him to put her in the film. So he plays a husband opposite her wife with his real life wife. They do an incredible job together. And then the last thing I wanted to heighten, or call attention to rather, was Millicent Simmons. She plays the oldest daughter of the Abbott family. The Abbott family is the central family in this movie.
Reagan, right?
Was her name Reagan? I didn't even look to see that, man.
I think.
There is so little time spent like using personal names in this because, you're just only communicating with people who are standing in front of you. Yeah, IMDb says you're right. It's Reagan. She is deaf and has been so since infancy due to a medication overdose. And one of the things I most appreciate about this movie is her being deaf is very much a part of who she is, but it does not define her. She is a well-rounded character who isn't sort of set up in front of us just to represent disability. And I think people who have disability or who loved ones have disability, I think the ones I know in those categories in my life are often frustrated with the way that people in those circumstances are portrayed in movies and what movies do with with people in those circumstances, I'm willing to bet they're going to love the way that this character and her deafness is handled. I thought it was really well done.
Mm-hmm. I agree, brother.
All right, anything else you want to highlight about the film itself before we jump in?
No. Are you jumping into the creation fall?
Yeah, so we're going to start chopping this movie up the way we normally do. We're going to run it through the grid of the Bible story. Worldview analysis is really what we're doing. The story is creation, where did everything come from? Fall, what has went wrong? Redemption, how will it get fixed if it can be? And glorification, what will it look like once it's fixed? So we know from the Bible's own story that everything originated in the mind and creative power of the one true living God. Everything went wrong when his creatures rebelled against him. He is going to fix it. He took sole responsibility, because he's the only one who can, to fix what has gone wrong through his son Jesus Christ. And it's going to look wonderful when the plan of redemption is completed, when everything is in submission to Jesus Christ and he delivers the kingdom up to his Father. So we're looking for echoes of that in the world of A Quiet Place. Jared, I'll start with creation, and you tell me what I got wrong or failed to mention.
Sure.
So the world of A Quiet Place is basically otherwise normal. You know, we would expect our own neighbors to live in this kind of world. People need food, and they need medicine, they get sick, there's family conflict. But this world has been invaded and decimated by monsters who are blind, but who hunt by sound. And apparently they are impervious to a lot of physical damage too, because one of the things we see on the Abbott father's, Lee is his name, Lee Abbott's board, where he's kind of working through a strategy to deal with this world. He says, are they armored or something like that? Basically, bullets don't really work on them. We see all these newspapers about, you know, the cities have fallen and your only hope is to stay quiet. So they're very powerful, very tough, and they hunt what they hear. And we have the Abbott family living on a rural farm, working very hard to adapt to a world where noise equals pretty much immediate death. Did that cover it, Jared, or is there anything I left out?
No, I think you got it right. I would only add that there is, even with all this danger, there's still love in this world, faith in this world, hope in this world. It's still a beautiful world, but more dangerous than our present world.
Yeah, that's well said. It's lovely in the way that it assumes good things about families and their hopes and aspirations, and like the grit of people to persevere in the face of incredibly challenging circumstances. You know, this is not a cynical movie.
Even the family sitting around and praying before they eat. I mean, it's just, in a world like that, an apocalyptic world, most movies that present an apocalyptic world, there's characters, or at least some characters, that abandon God altogether, like they question, and there's none of that in this movie.
Yeah, so the way apocalyptic movies handle religion is one, to just have everybody throw it away as obviously useful as whatever the apocalypse in that movie has revealed it to be, right? Where's your God now? God's always been dead. Or there are blind fanatics following some zealot who has marshaled religious imagery to wrest power for themselves out of the chaos. I think maybe the best version of that I've seen in a monster movie is the movie adaptation of The Mist. There's a crazy woman in the supermarket that everybody's trapped in who basically starts a cult in the name of Jesus Christ, and they start killing people. You either get that character or you get everybody going, oh yeah, we always knew God was a joke. That's not true in A Quiet Place. And you've raised the scene that was the most surprising out of any in that movie to me. I don't have a sense that Krasinski is a devoted follower of Christ. I've watched his career fairly closely because we all love The Office, it seems like. It's one of the few things that broad sweeps of people in our culture agree on. I'm fairly familiar with Emily Blunt. I've never seen them identified as, outspoken believers in a way that some celebrities are. So Jeremy Lin in the NBA, everybody knows that guy is a believer. I've never heard that with him. But in this movie where they can't speak, they self-consciously take time to pray. Again, I would not have been more surprised by, a monster jumping through the table when they sat down to eat than I would that they linked hands and prayed silently together. But I was really thankful to see that. It's almost like this echo of us realizing that family life at its healthiest is built around faith. I'm not sure. They may be criticized for it, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that there. You want to take fall here? Tell us what's fallen about in this world?
Fallen as far as it being dangerous. these creatures have, no moral code whatsoever. They're kind of, they're just animals, it appears. And so I actually enjoyed that distinction. I don't think that you can argue that man is just a glorified animal. At least this movie doesn't seem to portray that. It's a fallen world where human life can be taken, but it's a curse world as well. It very much mimics our world, except these dangerous creatures running around. And so I would say it's fallen because of the loss of life. Can be over so quickly.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so I just want to tell our I just want to tell our listeners that at this point, we're going to get into some specific plot details that will affect your experience of seeing this film. So if you've listened with us long enough to go, yeah, I think I want to watch this, or maybe I'll keep chewing on whether or not I'm going to watch this, cool, go ahead and hit pause, come back when you've made your decision. If you've seen the movie, or if you know, hey, I'm not going to see this movie, I'll go ahead and listen to your talk about it. That's cool, press on. But heads up, this is where we start talking about very specific plot details. I think you're right, Jared, about, fallenness in the real world has brought death into creation. Mm-hmm. Had man not rebelled against his creator, death would not be present in creation. This movie, death is always close at hand. And you see not just the way a monster will jump out and grab people, but you see it in one particularly poignant way where this old man has found his wife, it looks like, killed by these monsters, and he stumbles upon her body in the woods just as Lee Abbott and his son are crossing paths with him, and you can tell the old man is so overcome by grief that he's going to end his life by crying out so these monsters will hear him and come end his life. So death's there, suicide by these monsters is there, and it's not unlike the world we live in. You know what I mean? Like the means of death is not common to our world, but the fact that there is such a thing as death, that it strikes people unexpectedly, that we feel powerless in the face of it, and that people sometimes want to escape the pain of a world that has death and suffering in it by ending their own lives. Well, every bit of that is as common as basically the extended family of your church family. You're either going to know people directly there or people they're intimately connected with who are doing it. Anything else on that, brother?
No, not on fall. What about redemption?
Well, you took us there. Lead the way.
I would say that redemption happens when families survive by loving one another, sticking together, and also when children trust their parents.
Okay, I should have mentioned this previously, so let me put a pin right there. That is one other aspect of fallenness that's in this movie. Now, hear me out. This is one of the best portrayals of a father I can remember seeing in any movie. Maybe, the only thing I think is in the category is what the father in the Pixar movie, The Incredibles, what he eventually becomes is the only thing close to what I can remember seeing in terms of a positive portrayal of a father here. But there is alienation between the father and the oldest daughter. They were both intimately connected with the death of the youngest child in the family. And you would imagine it would introduce complexity and pain and trouble into that relationship. We get the sense that the dad has not been particularly faithful to tell his daughter that he loves her. He has leaned on showing her how much he loves her without communicating it to her. And so there is a very realistic facet of a fallen world that shows up there, even in the context of something that's really rich and good, namely the Abbott family life.
So strained relationships, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to note that since we were fairly recently talking about fallenness in this, but let me pull that pin back out now. And yeah, man, talk about how great the presentation of the family is in this movie.
Basically, the father is, he's the leader of the home. He's the provider. He's the protector. And the mother follows his leadership. Even when the teenager questions, she backs up the father's decisions. And she's very, it's very much a biblical portrayal of what husbands and wives and parenting looks like.
Yeah, well said. So just to be clear about this, in case there's any ambiguity, Emily Blunt's character is not a passive, know nothing, do nothing, kind of sheepishly obeying a husband who is the only competent adult in the room.
Right.
These people are very much partners. They have incredible agency. this is, I don't know when I want to talk about this. This may be as good as any time. But basically, Emily Blunt, her character in this movie, is a much more robust and beautiful and authentic representation of femininity, strong femininity, than Wonder Woman. If our listeners have listened to our episode on Wonder Woman or read my write-up on that, I have a really strong critique that Wonder Woman is strong in a way that is built on male archetypes. That is not true for Emily Blunt here. She and her husband have worked really hard to build a home in incredibly difficult circumstances where their children have a legitimate shot of flourishing as human beings despite the craziness of the surrounding world. And you're right, Krasinski is the leader. He's the provider. He is, the guy literally going out into the world to find resources for his family. But that doesn't denigrate Emily Blunt's character at all. You see her in the most trying of circumstances, building a home, creating a place where her family is provided for. She defends her family when called upon to do so. She's the one educating, their son on mathematics and literature. She's doing a version of the traditional household wife that in some ways is despised in our culture. But man, if you can watch this movie and despise her, I think there's something broken about your moral compass. She may not be out conquering, Wall Street or writing the next great novel, but she is dripping with dignity as someone who is showing real bravery in the face of terror on behalf of her family as a woman. And I'm thankful for a lot in this movie, but the vision of femininity and womanhood it puts forward, I think, is maybe the top of my list. And it's just completely unexpected. You don't see this stuff in Hollywood very much. It may be that we're at a point where the only place that our culture will allow for this kind of presentation is a one where a woman is literally cut off from the outside world by monsters. So she might as well be, a faithful homemaker. Even if you take that cynical read, though, this is a great movie about authentic femininity in a way that doesn't do injustice to women who, alongside being housemakers and creating spaces for their family to flourish, are also, like my wife, in a professional career and working very hard to glorify God outside of the home. This movie sets in front of you a beautiful vision of how a woman can pursue her calling in the context of her family in a way that puts a lie to the idea that being a homemaker is somehow a reduction of womanhood. I'll get off my soapbox. I know that was a little bit of a long-winded spiel there, but man, I'm just really enthusiastic about it. I'd rather watch this with my daughter saying, what does it look like to be a woman? I'd rather watch this movie, if she can handle the scares, 20 times over watching Wonder Woman, which is a movie I really enjoyed. What about, what are we missing here on redemption? Anything else we want to highlight?
I don't think so.
All right, so glorification. The better world is brought about. I don't want to lay it all on John Krasinski's character's shoulders, because clearly the mom has an equal hand in creating a better world for her family. But Lee Abbott models self-sacrifice from the moment we meet him, basically. He, when his youngest child is threatened and eventually taken by these monsters, John Krasinski's character is not cowering in fear or like away from the scene. He is sprinting toward his child in a way comparable to the way the monster is sprinting toward his child. You get the sense he's going to fight this thing for his child's life if he can just get there in time. Sadly, he doesn't. But then we see that he's training his child to take over for him should he be killed or just grow old. And you see that in his free time after dinner, he's trying to build an earpiece for his daughter so that she will be able to regain her hearing in some sense. But when his wife comes down the stairs and doesn't really say much to him, she just puts her hand on his shoulder and kind of tugs on him. He leaves that work and goes and has a very intimate dance with her in a way that looks very responsive to what she's saying she needs in that moment. And that all culminates in him giving his life for his children. But that all also combines, by the end of the movie, his living out of self-sacrifice gives them hope of a world where these monsters can be defeated, because it turns out that his work has produced what he didn't realize was a weapon to be used against these monsters. So we're left at the end of the movie hoping that this family is going to mourn the loss of a truly wonderful husband, but his life and death on their behalf really does give them high odds of having a safer life beyond this movie and even his own death.
Yeah, so that's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
So his work,
go ahead.
I'm just thinking through what you said there about his work. Even though he gives his life for his family, but his work is what ultimately saves them, and it's his work for the daughter that questions his love. It is a beautiful story.
Absolutely. And again, I'm highlighting him here. By the end of the movie, he's dead, and Emily Blunt's character is the one with a shotgun in the face of a monster. So I just want to stress again, she is never passive, a victim of her circumstances. She's very much what she's called to be as a mother as well. But I just want to highlight that Krasinski's character has really been a faithful husband and father, and it's given a place to the rest of his family where they can flourish in their own roles and thrive as well, which, like you said, that's a deeply biblical image of what the household should look like.
Right. And her femininity is the same. I mean, it is all the things that you're pointing out as far as it not being a weakness and all that. That's stereotypes of how people often view when we speak of complementarianism, or when we speak of the Christian home. They think that, well, that automatically means, submission always means less than, or complementarianism means abuse. It's an abusive system, and all this junk that just isn't real in reality. Now,
well, I mean, we want to say there are people who have lived what they call complementarianism in a way that is abusive, but that is a perversion of the ideology, not inherent to the ideology.
Right. And that goes for every system, egalitarian. It goes for every,
Absolutely.
I mean, you base it on, and you and I, we're seeking to live our lives based on what the Bible teaches. And at the end of the day, that's what matters to us, right? It matters. If the Bible taught egalitarianism, that's what we would teach and believe and seek to practice in our homes, but it doesn't. And so, this movie helps show how beautiful complementarianism can be. I believe. I think it is a very healthy portrayal, and I would say even what it should be. This is what it, and I think you could argue it's kind of a soft complementarianism in this movie at times, but I think overall they get it right.
Yeah, for sure. And you say maybe a soft complementarianism. I think this is the kind of complementarianism that we all want to live out instinctually. You know what I mean? Like, this family isn't sitting around thinking about gender roles and dignity, within those roles, particularly. They're trying to survive, yes, but, for them, it's clear survival isn't the end goal. It's having a thriving household. And so they're just pursuing what's best for their family, and it looks like it's shook out this way instinctually. In some ways, I kind of like that, maybe more than an explicit, like, we are complementarian and we're going to pursue that. I think I value the way it shows up in this film more than I would an explicit consideration of the subject. We've labored here for a while in the worldview analysis. Let's get into the further questions we asked to start pulling out what we've surfaced through the worldview analysis and doing something with it. The first question we ask is, what's the story? And we want to pay careful attention to the story to receive the communication well. Hopefully we've accomplished that through our worldview analysis just now. The second is, where am I? So see the style and shape of the imaginary world. Where are you at in this movie, Jared Moore?
Well, hopefully I'm John Krasinski. Hopefully I'm Lee, as far as a husband and a father, protector, provider, encourager, lover.
Excuse me, I'll be right back. I'll be vomiting in the trash can here for a few minutes.
Yeah. Like loving his wife properly, loving his children properly.
Right.
But I want to say something briefly about the sound, how the sound, does a very good job of it moving the story along. You understand early on that the monsters react to sound. You pick that up before it's ever shown on the board. And that helps, and how they're signing to even kids who can speak, and how they're, Lee gets on to the youngest there at the beginning to, he takes the batteries out of the toy and lays them down, and he's stern without being treating his son like an enemy, or what I'm saying, like the difference between discipline and hatred.
Yeah, and it's clearly aimed at protecting his child from death, which, one of the best books I've ever read on parenting is Shepherding a Child's Heart. And one of the things that I love so much about that book is that it tells your child, or rather it tells the parent, to help the child see the way that you are protecting them from death through the discipline you bring into their lives, that they can see your heart even when your hand, and I don't mean that literally, I know not everybody out there has chosen to spank a child, but when your hand has brought something into their life that they would not prefer, help them see the heart behind it and the way you're protecting them from danger. And man, he's a great, Lee Abbott is a great model of that.
Yeah, and I think the creatures were truly terrifying. Great special effects. The speed at which they moved was really out of this world, but it didn't look fake to me. I mean, it looked very real. And even that scene where that creature goes down into the water, how it almost gets they look huge, but then all of a sudden it's like a spider. It kind of balls up almost and starts swimming around. I mean, that's just creepy.
Yeah. So that scene, if you don't remember, listener, is the room that Emily Blunt and the newborn baby are staying in is filling with water. She wakes up to realize not only that, oh my gosh, this room is filling with water, but one of the creatures has found its way into the room, and she gets into the water. I mean, this is one of those ways that they show her to be so brave as a woman. She gets into the water that the creature's standing in order to go get her baby, which is between her and the monster. And we all know if that monster hears her, it doesn't matter if she's got the baby or the baby's floating in its crib box, they're both dead. But that doesn't stop her from being proactive and going as a mother to protect her child. But she, I'm really delighted by this character, if you can't tell. She goes and collects her baby, and about the time she does so, the creature slips into the water. And honest to goodness, in the theater, my instinct was to pull my feet up off the floor. And then that monster comes up out of the water right in front of her face as soon as she's taken the baby. And dude, it is powerful. And it's not just powerful because of the fear it produces, although, man, I was on the edge of my seat in terms of tension. This woman looks that creature in the face and doesn't balk, doesn't run screaming, doesn't, lose control of herself, forfeit her agency. She takes wise steps to protect her child as best she's able in that moment. I go from like wanting to pull my feet up to wanting to stand up and clap.
Oh, yeah. And I think every character in this movie, if someone around that age watches it, so if a teenage girl watches it, I think she'll identify with Reagan. If if my son, 10-year-old, watched it, he would identify with a young boy who's scared, who's terrified. He doesn't want to go with his dad. He doesn't want to be the protector and provider, but that will change as he gets older.
His dad is not letting his fear define him. He's sort of appropriately pushing him out of safety, at least his comfort level, so that he will eventually grow beyond it. But even as he's doing that, he's constantly putting him in these positions where he can say, he says multiple times, stop and listen to me. You're safe. And he walks him through why his fear is not definitive in the moment. I mean, it is masterful. You said you hope to be Lee Abbott. I come away deeply challenged about how rarely I fail, or excuse me, how rarely I succeed in being anything like a dad who, my worldview and my resources in Christianity push me towards being a Lee Abbott. But man, I don't know that I've ever modeled it as well as Krasinski does there. And he doesn't do it in a way that looks unrealistic. He does it in a way that I could go home and model tonight. Anyway.
And he tells his son, like when the monster's attacking the mother, and sees those red lights, he says, your mom needs you. You can do this. And the son goes and does it. I mean, it's, the thing is, though, I've noticed in my children, I think there are accurate portrayals of a teenage girl and adolescence in this movie. I think it's an accurate portrayal of a 10-year-old boy, even of the 3 or 4-year-old at the beginning. I mean, it's just accurate across the board. These are all real, believable characters who may live down the street from you. I mean, or you see them in the mirror. I think they did a great job. I think each of those age groups they'll identify with these characters.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you raised the scene about the little boy. I don't know that actor, but he does such a great job without using really any words communicating someone whose life is defined by terror. He has seen his little brother taken by monsters. He knows the seriousness of the consequences of failing to stay quiet in this world. He comes off as legitimately a scared little boy.
Mm-hmm. He does. And something interesting, if you noticed in the final scene, he's the one protecting the baby. He's the one that's got the baby in the corner. While the mother and the older sister seek to deal with the monster. But it's just interesting that he's kind of stepped into a role there more so than he's had
absolutely
in the past. And
when they're there in the barn, what a thing to say. When father and son are in the barn, they're aware that mom's in danger. Dad's got to go deal with the monster in the house. The son has to go set off the distraction. And he tells him, mom's in danger. She needs to do this. You can do it. And then the boy goes off to do it. I mean, I'm choked up recounting it. You know, we've talked on here before about one of the things we want to communicate to our boys is that bravery is doing what's right, even when you're scared. And again, in a way that doesn't look incredible. I mean that in the technical sense. In a way that looks like little boys may be called upon to show bravery. That guy heads off to do it. And again, you can hear me blubbering over here, but man, it's such a beautiful vision of a dad helping a young man grow into manhood. And you're right, it transforms him, which is what we're all hoping for, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I also love that when we finally see one of these monsters killed, not because, I'm playing to some other kind of, gendered stereotypes in our broader culture, but when we see one of the monsters finally get killed, it's because the mother and the daughter are working together with the resources provided by the father. And so you have an incredibly brave woman and young girl standing up in the face of sheer terror, but they're doing it as part of this family unit that was carved out in a lot of ways by the faithfulness of the father who had gone before them. And it's just, this movie is just gift after gift after gift in terms of the themes and the specific scenes, what they mean in the broader context.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're both gushing about this. The next question though is what's distorted, evil, and false? How can I subvert idolatry? The idolatry that this movie inclines me toward. Where do you see idolatry here, Jared?
I don't know that it's something distorted or evil, but I think it's false because it's not reality. So there's one thing missing from this movie, and that's evil humans. In most apocalyptic stories, there's good humans and bad humans usually. And when survival at all costs is the mentality, usually it's at the expense of other humans. But there's not a single evil human in this movie, not one. Now there's only 7 living human characters from beginning to end in this movie, but there is this community. There's this where he sits on the roof in his neighborhood or on the silo top of it, I think, and he lights a fire, and other communities or other families, within sight of that light fires as well to basically say, hey, we're okay. I don't know. I guess that was my one qualm with this, because redemption in this world is basically when the monsters are defeated, right?
Yeah.
And so, we don't have those monsters. And the world that they're portraying is the world you and I live in today. And yet, without any monsters, like fictitious, good grief, there are monsters all over the place in this real world. Mm-hmm. But they're humans, and that's the thing. It's that was left out, and I thought that was the only, if they had added a scene where he had to deal with an evil human, but because that's not in there, there's basically humanity, and basically all humanity's good battling these evil monsters.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. I guess the closest thing you get to an evil person is that old man in the woods, right, who chooses to endanger Abbott and his son for the low-hanging reward of being released from his grief by these monsters. So the one guy you get is sort of low-level vicious in the way that his selfishness defines his choices regardless of how it conflicts with other people's best interests. But that's a really light touch.
It is. I mean, you could argue that fella was just overcome with grief too. I mean,
definitely.
Because Lee looks at him and says, because it appears that he had just walked up, like the man had just got there and realized his wife was dead.
Yeah.
And would just overcome with grief grief. I don't know. It's hard to. So it's not an overt portrayal of evil or even a subtle portrayal of evil.
It's an understandable.
It is. I'm sympathetic towards.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic and empathetic towards the fella who screamed. But yeah, you're right. It was a selfish. I mean, he knew what would happen. But he should not. He definitely should not have endangered Lee and his son. But also in this movie, because of that portrayal, evil is basically outside of humanity in this movie. There's no evil humans in this movie. It gives the illusion that if the monsters are defeated, then we can just live happily ever after in this world. And what's sad. This sounds bad, brother, but when you know how Hollywood is as far as marriages and families. It seems like every week you turn on the news and another Hollywood couple's breaking up or they're divorcing. And I hope with this portrayal, Lee is so perfect in this movie, man, that I don't know that any man can measure up to that. And that may be wrong. Maybe there are men out there like that. It's just that often whenever I I can remember. So growing up, we're always longing for genuine portrayals of, people who portray characters we love. We hope that they're believers faithfully in their real lives. I can remember looking up Bill Cosby and just love. I mean, I loved Cosby and loved the Cosby Show, and then looking that up and then just being. I mean, just
devastated.
Devastated, heartbroken over, and it's not just him; it's many, many others. And the effect that it had. It's like it's still a movie at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Which is sad because we should be able to do what Lee does in this movie.
Yeah.
But our sinfulness often hinders us from doing that. I mean, he doesn't. I don't think he loses his temper one time in the movie.
No, he's remarkably patient and calm and self-sacrificial. You're right. I do think that he is in a rare echelon of people who, parent well, basically, and husband well. I hope that people will take this as aspirational and say, I'm not living up to that, but if I can get to 65, 70, 75, 80, 85% of what he's doing, my family's really going to profit. And so I'm just going to keep, after it.
Oh yeah, I think so. But as far as what is false, I think that may be what is false in this movie. I mean, the only evil act, and most people would say, oh, that's just being a teenager, was the daughter sinning against her father by giving the toy back to the child. But even that, she didn't give him the batteries.
Yeah, and she was trying to be a sweet sister.
Yes, and I mean, we all understand that, right? I was curious why the dad took away why he didn't give him the toy back and just take the batteries out. But I guess he thought he might find batteries later on.
It becomes like a rogue element.
Mm-hmm. And so, but what about you? What do you think as far as distorted evil false?
The one thing that I see here, because like I said, your point about no selfish people is one I hadn't considered, and that's very helpful. The one that I saw is probably uniquely a temptation to parents who are Christians or deeply given to some overriding ideology. So like, I think parents who are super into social justice or super into creation cares, what we would call as Christians, but like environmental stewardship. There are houses that are built around a central ethical conviction. I think this movie tempts people to believe, particularly Christian families, that their household has all the resources. Their household has all the resources that are needed for the family itself and the coming generations it will produce to thrive. In some ways, this is a homeschooling fantasy that if I can just keep my household together and we can cultivate the right things in ourselves and our children, we will not just survive but thrive in a hostile world, basically with my household as a spaceship that's, navigating this hostile world. You've homeschooled. You're now in Christian private school, but you didn't make that choice because you became dissatisfied with homeschooling.
Right.
We have our kids in Christian private school. We do that because my wife is an educator by vocational calling, and it's a help to us in our discipleship aims for our children. But if that wasn't the case, we would probably be homeschooling. We know lots of homeschooling families. We know lots of rich household cultures that have been developed by those kinds of households. We aspire to have that kind of household in some ways, but there is this implicit temptation to think that our family is sufficient, and it's just not true. I don't want to sound like it takes a village to raise a child or to raise a household. That's not true. But what is true is it takes a church to raise children. It takes a church to raise a household. It takes a church to raise parents. You know what I mean? Like, I won't become Lee Abbott by staying on my farm and taking care of my kids. I'll become Lee Abbott in part by doing those things, but also by being held accountable, encouraged, informed by brothers and sisters in the church.
Good
and so,
point.
We don't want to play to this particularly Christian, fantasy that, it's such a powerful fantasy because it's rooted in really good things. It's important that you take your household culture seriously, and a lot of good can be gained there. You just can't only be a household. You have to be part of the household of faith. And I just want to stress that as a danger that, most of our listeners, we assume, are professing believers. Just beware, guys. Don't let this play to, your instincts to say, if I can just get my family isolated from the world, things are going to go well. There is a sense in which isolation from the world is helpful, but you're not going to have the resources within the four walls of your house to become what the Bible calls you to. You need to be engaged with the church and through the church in the process of seeing God's commission to make disciples of all nations brought to pass.
Amen, brother. Amen. One good thing I thought of too about this movie, its portrayal of children was good. Like how children. So think about choosing to have a baby. Think about choosing to have a baby in this type of world.
Yeah.
And knowing that even if that baby provides great risk, literally puts every single other family member's life in danger.
Sure.
It's. I guess they could have had an accident, but it's not like they're back in time, right? As husband and wife. They know the world they're living in. You have to assume that this was some choice that they made to have another child. Even in how the dates, right? It shows like day 79, I think, and it shows the little boy dying, and then it jumps to day 400 and something. And so just by them doing that, in my opinion, and the next time you see her, she's pregnant. In my opinion, they're showing that this was a choice of the parents to have another child. But it's just interesting that, good grief, in that world, there's nothing more dangerous than a baby. Because the babies cry all the time, and they get colic, and they get. It's just. I thought that was the value of children in this movie is right on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Now, I guess we could all say maybe they had an accident in marital intimacy and she conceived. But even if that's the case, in the worst possible, no, this is not something we wanted and we're really scared. They go about building a nursery and a special crib and hanging a mobile for the child to look at. Bringing a baby into this world, even as dangerous as it is, they present as a good thing to be enjoyed. And we live in a world that's increasingly hostile to the idea of children. They're seen as a hindrance on a career, hindrance on being able to travel the way you want to, hindrance on your financial goals. Man, these guys are a great model of saying, no, it's a great thing when a baby comes into the world.
Which is pretty remarkable. Isn't that remarkable? In that world where noise is the greatest danger, you can't get more noisy than a kid. You might as well. My house, dude, when I go home, your house too, when I go home, it's like a tornado constantly of noise.
Yeah.
And actually, when I get somewhere, like I'm out visiting church members, it's so quiet at their houses, I almost go to sleep every time I sit down, and I tell them, I said, I'm sorry, but it's just so quiet here.
Right.
But
Well, the thing that I'm going to say here is I can't track it down right now off the top of my head mentally, but I think I read it on First Things. One of the websites I read regularly, not too long ago, had an article about how it is an act of bravery to have children, and that having children says that we have confidence in the sovereignty of God, even as the world looks increasingly hostile to the things of God. You know, that choosing to have children is itself a brave thing and communicates something about what we believe about ultimate reality.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty compelling point. This family is that personified.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thankful. I want to celebrate that because it looks a lot like the world we live in. You know, I have family members who care about my children deeply, and one of the things that one of them in particular repeats is, I just don't know what kind of world they're going to live in. And dude, that fear lives in my heart too. But I am confident. I'm confident that Jesus Christ is Lord of whatever world they live into.
Mm-hmm.
And my great hope is not that they would find a thriving place in society, although I certainly want that, and a safe place to pursue their own household raising. But I want them to love Jesus above everything else. And I think he can bring that to pass in whatever world is coming. So I am thankful for babies are a good thing, being central to the plot of A Quiet Place.
Amen, buddy.
Anything else we've got to say here, Jared? Or anything you do? I've got one last piece and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, how does the gospel apply? Jesus provides a world where there aren't any monsters, but it's because there's no sin there. I mean, the greatest things that hinders humanity is not something outside of us, but something in us. And Jesus came to save us from that by actually becoming that thing in us that has ruined us. The Bible says that he became sin for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
What this movie misses is that monsters are real, but that they're humans. And Jesus Christ was treated like a monster for us so that he could save true monsters, so that we could be brought into a right relationship with God, so that we could have reconciliation. So this movie thinks it's longing for a world without monsters, but because it gets the monsters wrong, at least partially wrong, it's really longing for heaven. I mean, that's what that's what they want. They want a familial relationship, a closeness that only the church eternally can provide due to union with Christ. Do you have anything to add to that as far as the gospel applying, Jeff? Because I've got something as far as how to talk to others like unbelievers about this movie.
Well, I was actually just kind of enjoying you putting that presentation in front of us, man. You're right. This movie looks to an eternal home, and I guess I wasn't aware of that till you mentioned it. So I also wanted to spend some time on the subject of how to talk to others.
Sure.
I just commend your final point there to the consideration of our listeners. And yeah, what do we do with this with our neighbors?
I would say this is a good portrayal. I would say a biblical portrayal of husband and wife relationship and parent and children roles. I mean, what I think these come straight out of the Bible. I think this is Judeo-Christianity on display. That may be an overstatement, but these roles and relationships came from somewhere, and because of where this is portrayed, and I mean, they're portraying a biblical, even whether it's intentional or not. And so you can also point that out, and I would ask folks if they think that this is beautiful, good. Would this be beautiful and good for homes throughout our community? I mean, and so at least get them thinking about that. And like you were saying, Jeff, I want to hear a feminist tell me that Emily Blunt's character is not a strong feminine example. But also, you can explain how Christ offers an eternity of familial closeness. In this movie, the goal is not to die, but the problem is everybody in the movie eventually is going to die. Everybody dies. So wages of sin is death. So we need someone who has conquered death, and Christ offers that, and he also offers us all that we long for concerning family. He's the husband, the church is the bride, God is the father, and we're all brothers and sisters for all eternity, by the Spirit through the Son to the Father. I mean, everything that we love about our families, that is eternal as far as relationally with our brothers and sisters in Christ forevermore. And I look forward to that time. These movies that we watch where they portray what the family should be helps me to look at my family and and work harder, but also it helps me to see that Christ's finished work and what he's already accomplished for us is waiting on us. And I long for that, man. I long for what this movie longs for. This movie doesn't know that it longs for heaven, but I long for it, man.
Amen, brother. I think there's a little bit of usefulness to kind of hang on the broader points you just made. I know of families in our church who have loved ones that they deeply care about, but who think the Christian vision of life is basically incomprehensible. And that's going to be an increasing problem because we're living into exile as Westerners. I'm not trying to like adopt a martyr complex, but religious people look increasingly weird to our neighbors who aren't participants in a religious tradition. I think this movie is going to be really useful to the Christian to say, if you think we're weird as Christians and you have a hard time of understanding what we want from our household and why we make choices we make, like, we're going to watch certain movies but not other ones. We're going to structure our children's social lives in certain ways and not others. We're going to limit cell phone use, or the choices that we make that look weird to non-believers or even believers of a different conviction. I think one of the things this movie lets us do is go, look, basically we want to be that family right there. Whatever oddity you're sensing here, we get it, but the intention behind it is to look like that family there, where we have profitably created a home that has access to certain things and is walled off from other things because we're trying to find the right balance between danger and opportunity in a way that helps our family flourish. This movie is a pretty good image to put in front of people so they can see it even if they can't rationally comprehend it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, man. And I wonder, the thing is though, I wonder if they see this as I wonder if an unbeliever comes to this movie and they do not connect it to Christianity in any way.
I'm sure, because this movie, other than the prayer scene, this movie isn't rooted in the instruction to ancient Israel to teach your children the law as you walk along the streets and as you lay down and as you eat dinner. I get it. But I think Christians really want to grab a hold of any opportunity they have to say, oh, let me explain to you why that movie is so compelling to you as an evangelistic aim.
Yeah.
How that movie is very consistent with what the Bible says the goal of Christian faith in the household is. And then, again, for those family members who don't understand the choices you're making, look, guys, this is what we're trying to do. I think, an unbeliever has every reason to come to that movie and not connect it to Christianity. But I hope Christians are really quick every opportunity they get to then help that unbeliever connect it to Christianity. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, man. And if there are unbelievers out there who mimic these two relational roles, I'd like to meet them. I would be curious to pick their brains concerning why, you know what I'm saying? Concerning why they are why they do these roles that they do. I mean, is it pragmatism? Is it tradition? What is the underlying foundation and what's the goal?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, we went pretty deep dive on A Quiet Place. I think you can tell that we're delighted by this movie. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We want to hear what you have to say about the movie. We want to hear what you have to say about our own conclusions about this movie and our analysis. You can find us on most social media platforms at the handle PCCD Pod. We'd love to hear from you there. We're also on Reddit, and Reddit functions as kind of a message board for our podcast. So you can find that at r/PCCD Pod. We'd love to hear from you on all fronts. One other thing, we're going to move in our next couple episodes into movies that are available on Netflix. That's one of the things we staked out as a methodology we wanted to make use of when we started this podcast. Yeah, we want to talk about stuff in the theater like A Quiet Place, but a lot of the people we want to serve are families, and a lot of families do more of their movie consumption through Redbox and Netflix and Amazon Prime Video or whatever, Hulu. So we're going to move into Redbox material for the next couple episodes. Hope that those things are helpful for you as well. Jared, where can they find you on social media outside of our podcast?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jared H. Moore. You can find me on Facebook at All Truth is God's Truth. I have another podcast called All Truth is God's Truth. Check it out. And you can find us on our blog at patheos.com/blogs/pop culture coram deo. We write accompanying we write pieces that accompany our episodes. Jeff just wrote one about Disney princesses, and I want to encourage you to go check it out.
All right, brother. You can find me at Right Jeff on most social media platforms. I'd love to connect with you in that way as well. And if you're willing, guys, it would be a big help to us if you would get on iTunes or wherever else you're listening to this podcast and leave us a review. We covet, in the best sense of that word, 5-star reviews, but we'll take any that you want to leave. That does a couple things for us. One, it helps other people who may enjoy and benefit from this podcast to find it because of the mysterious algorithms that iTunes and other platforms use to highlight content. It also helps us find out what you like and didn't like and helps us improve the show. So if you're willing, maybe you're listening to this podcast right now at your desk or somewhere near a computer. I know it's awkward, but pull up iTunes, find our podcast, leave us a review. That would mean the world to us, and we're thankful for everyone who's done that. That will wrap up this episode of the Pop Culture Coram Deo podcast. For Jared Moore, I am Jeff Wright, thanking you for downloading and pressing play on this episode. We hope it's profitable to you, and we will look forward to talking to you on the next episode of the Pop Culture Coram Deo podcast. Thanks. Okay, guys, you got a special treat here, a little bonus material from our normal podcast. That is because I like A Quiet Place so much that I insisted that my wife go watch the movie right away. A couple hours ago, she got home from doing just that. I don't think I'm misrepresenting when I say on her behalf that she was as enthusiastic about the movie as I was. And one of the things that I'm most excited about this movie for is the portrayal of womanhood that Emily Blunt's character pulls off. And there's no woman who I find more thoughtful talking about movies and stories in general with than my wife, Christy Wright. So I want to sit down with her and maybe do a little gushing together.
Yes, let's gush. Mutual gushing.
Mutual gushing.
That doesn't sound.
That sounds disgusting. Right? Actually, is what that sounds. We won't harken back to that at all. We'll just pretend that didn't happen. So Chris, again, we both love this movie, right?
We did.
And I told you, and I told Jared, there were a couple of scenes with Emily Blunt's character where I legit wanted to stand up and clap.
Right.
Now, people who have listened to Pop Culture Coram Deo or read our site know that I was very critical of Wonder Woman, which was a film I enjoyed, but that it was supposed to be remarkable for its positive portrayal of women. But I thought that too much of what it said about Wonder Woman's uniqueness was really built on male archetypes.
Right. That she was, it really was a way for us to see that a woman can do what men do. Like it's still it's just an old form of feminism that anything you can do, I can do better.
Yeah, but I just thought it was even worse than that because, the strongest male is pretty much always going to be stronger than the strongest female.
Sure.
So I just thought, there's a lot that's uniquely beautiful about women. Let's have Wonder Woman highlight that. And I felt like they missed that opportunity. Conversely, I feel like this movie nailed womanhood.
Right.
But I'm a guy.
You are.
So, tell me what you thought about Emily Blunt's character. Tell me if you share my enthusiasm about a distinctly strong and feminine character who's strong in a way, basically a woman is uniquely able to be strong.
Right. So I think what I liked about her character and about the portrayal of men and women is that both of the characters, the mom and the dad, exhibit such excellent qualities that are the same, like strength, bravery, compassion, absolutely, the ability to sacrifice, but they do that in uniquely female and male ways. So that what you don't have is the man is doing this set of things and the woman is doing that set of things. They're both able to exhibit these qualities that I think, again, are true to female nature or male nature.
Well, wait,
but they're able.
You just said they're not. The male's not doing these things, and the woman's doing these things. I feel like I saw them doing that a lot. Now there was overlap.
Right. What I meant is that you're not seeing two different kinds of qualities in the male and the female. You see them doing different kinds of different actions. Trait. Right. So but to exhibit the same qualities, which I think is a really great picture of complementarianism.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can this may have gotten muddy for our listeners.
Right.
You're saying the same virtues are present in both.
Yes.
But they express them in ways that are authentically and distinctly masculine and feminine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll carry on.
Without being oppressive. So, Emily Blunt's character, who has a name actually, when you see the credits, they actually have names.
It's the Abbott family. I know he is Lee. I can't remember her name.
Which, by the way, doesn't come up in the movie for those who haven't seen it yet. So she, I guess the most obvious, we'll just start here. She's pregnant and then gives birth. And that is something that only females can do. It's not very politically correct, but I'm going to go with it. something that only females can do.
It matches reality.
It does. So she does that. And there, I thought, there could have been a lot of other things that she or the family has to go through that would endanger their family. Right. And that was kind of the one, like, that's what everything builds up to, is this child being born and what will happen when the baby's here, because babies are notoriously not quiet. So she does this. And I don't know if this is my hearkening back to, having children myself, or just watching her portrayal, but it's like I've never seen strength portrayed better than when I watched her do this really feminine thing, and I loved that so much. And yet, giving birth, right? And then you also see John Krasinski's character displaying that same virtue of strength in ways that are maybe not uniquely masculine. I think a lot of the things he does, women could do, right? So a woman could have run after her son when he was being attacked early in the movie. A woman could have gone fishing. A woman could have swung an axe at a monster, right? But he's the one who's allowed to do that and set up to do that. And he does those things well. And so I appreciate that the way they portray Emily Blunt's character, that she can be strong, but she doesn't have to wield the axe. And she doesn't have to be the one who's going and hunting and fishing. She doesn't have to be leading in those kinds of ways or doing those kinds of things, because it seems like most of the time when a woman's strength needs to be put on display, they give her traditional male jobs and say, see, she could do that. She could grab a gun and she can go hunt. And with Emily Blunt's character, you see her doing things that are very particularly feminine. Yet at the end, she does grab a gun, and it's assumed that she is going to hunt these animals.
But she's the only one who kills one in the entire movie,
right? And so she's not only given the kinds of jobs that women can only do, right? Like bearing the child isn't the only thing that she's allowed to do to exhibit her strength. So she's given an opportunity to be uniquely female, but also you see that if she needs to protect her family in the way that her husband had been doing, in a way that's very physical and very violent, that she can do that as well. But she doesn't do it as her primary role. Her primary role,
she's pressed into it, but she can do it, and she almost does it without blinking, right? You see this moment where she considers, I think when they see the monsters running towards them, she kind of considers this plan of how they can hunt these creatures, and it's about a second, and then she just cocks that gun and she's ready to go. And I love that picture of womanhood, because she's able to be strong in the way that she's working with her children. I mean, she's literally doing laundry and cooking and caring for kids. She's teaching. She's doing these really traditional female things. And she doesn't look weak, and you don't get the impression that she can't do the other things. Or that she's denigrated by virtue of doing these things.
Absolutely. You don't get the impression that she is oppressed at all.
Or that she's been robbed of dignity.
Absolutely.
I specifically like, and this may be, you can tell me if I'm overblown on this, I specifically like that when she does take up arms, she is pressed into duty to do so. The appropriate thing would have been for the husband to have taken up the arms, but he has given his life for the family and is unable to do so. It is very good for a mother to protect her family.
Right.
Most of the time, protecting her family is going to be in the things we've already seen Emily Blunt's character doing. Feeding them, providing a lovely place for them to thrive in, literally bringing them into the world. That is protecting your family. And she does a lot of that in her labor, right?
Right.
So if she makes a noise, but then also the baby are going to be destroyed by this monster. So she's doing her breathing in a way that keeps the noise down, but she stays moving in a time when, based on my experience with you don't want to be walking around or, shuffling away from a monster.
Right.
She's still being nurturing in those things, but it shows that she's willing to put her own very desperate needs to the side in order to protect her family, including, fine, if the monsters are coming, there's no one else more appropriate here. And, she's not just pressed into duty and kind of ham-handedly doing it. Like when the monster moves, she keeps the weapon trained on them instantaneously without any kind of hesitation.
Right.
And as soon as she sees her window, she takes it and puts the monster down. Yeah. I love that she was so competent, and I love that she was pressed into doing it, because they both say something important about the way women care for the people under their care.
It's hard for me to not think of course I have limited knowledge here, but maybe what a woman would have been like in the Old West, right? So you're doing the things that are unique to a woman. And so women can't go out and hunt for weeks at a time because somebody has to carry the children and then nurse them. And those are things that only females can do. And so it makes sense the way those responsibilities would divide. But again, she could also pick up a gun and she can go hunt and she can provide for her family if she needs to. And I think that's just more honoring to women than something you might see in a Wonder Woman, because you're acknowledging how really versatile a woman can be, that she can be very nurturing and that she's built to do that really well, but that she can also do these other things. And I just don't see this emphasis in this movie that she can do all the things her husband did better than him, right? Like they're not really pitted against each other. And so you don't have the scene where maybe he takes a shot and she shoots and her aim is better that you might see in another movie, or where he freezes and she doesn't because she's more committed to the kids. Like you don't see them pitted against each other. Their roles and their responsibilities and the things they're called to do are very clear and delineated, but she also has the ability to cross over. But he does as well. You pointed out that he's the one who takes his son aside and, tries to shepherd his heart and working with his son to not be fearful. And so he's being very nurturing, and he brings his son to that waterfall where he can have this peace and this respite and the ability to talk. And so he's very nurturing as well. And yet he doesn't come off as feminine, by doing that either. So yeah, I think it's a great representation of what it means to be a strong woman and also what it means to be a strong man.
Yeah. And I'm trying to get my finger on what I appreciate about that. I think there is a read of this movie that misses the point that you and I are enthusiastic about, where they see that like, yeah, she was good at taking care of the family, but she's just as good at what John Krasinski's character was doing, if that was what was needed. I don't feel like this is what the movie is saying. I think it's saying that it is appropriate for John to be doing the kind of things he's doing.
Right. Because
while he's there.
Right. And he is, I don't know if this was intentional for this movie, how much he prepared, or if that's just what he looks like normally, but he's big and strong.
And then it is appropriate for her to be doing the thing that she's doing while John's doing what's appropriate to him.
Right.
But once he is taken out of the picture, what is appropriate for her to be doing changes.
Right.
And she meets that need as a woman, right? It's not like she's not interchangeable with a man.
Right.
But the level of, or the specific thing that is needed in the moment, she shifts to provide for her family as she's called upon. I just couldn't be more enthusiastic. The thing I mentioned previously with Jared is that there's this scene where she wakes up after delivery and there's water filling this bunker they've created. She sees the baby's crib floating. She looks across from that and sees one of the monsters there. And she gets into the water to go get her child. Now we know her holding that child or that child in the crib, neither one of them has better defenses against this monster.
Right.
But that woman moved toward the monster to take her child.
Right.
Take responsibility for her child and take care for it. And that monster eventually slithers into the water. And about the time she's lifting the baby out of the crib, it comes up and she's face to face with it. She spends more time face to face with monsters than any other character who lives in this movie. She doesn't scream. She doesn't lose her mind. She keeps her wits and does what she can in the moment. Like she can't get away. She can't assault this thing. So she moves to the far corner of the room. She does what's available.
Right.
And it's so brave. And like I wanted to stand up and just be like, you are awesome and cheer for her.
And what you see her doing, right before that, Krasinski's character says, you have to stay here and rest. And I imagine, right, that progressive women are in an uproar. Well, she
not if they've ever delivered a baby.
Not right. Yeah, absolutely. That's just practically the most helpful thing. But still like, oh, you just have to lie in your bed and sit here and be passive. And again, that's what's necessary for her, physically at the time. But also if she is called to do anything different, then she does that.
She rises to meet it.
Right. But she doesn't fight him. She's not this super stubborn woman who waits for her husband to leave. And then when he's not looking, she goes and grabs a gun and goes to follow after him. Again, I'm thinking of tropes that I might see in other movies. She doesn't. She stays there until she doesn't have to.
That's something Jared mentioned. I can't remember if we got it recorded or not, but he noted that she never really challenges him. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if a woman challenges her husband, that it's somehow immoral. But the son begs her, don't make me go. But she said, no, your dad wants to train you to take care of us.
Right.
Or take care of me or old. She backs his play. She doesn't side against him. When the daughter pitches a fit that she's not going, and I think he tells the daughter, John Krasinski's character tells the daughter, you need to be here for mom or something like that. She storms storms off. John looks at his wife and says, maybe next time. But she doesn't criticize or like see what you've done or anything like that. She's very much his partner.
Right.
But she's a partner with him in a way that makes crystal clear she is not diminished in dignity because she is following his lead.
Right.
I so appreciate it. I don't know if this movie will survive. I think it will. Jared predicted, I think off air, something I'm convinced of now, that this maybe is going to unseat Get Out as the most popular horror movie. It may make more money than Muschietti's It remake because there's basically nothing in this movie that anybody won't love. But here's the caveat to that. If someone comes along and says, this looks complementarian,
right,
the political weight of that could torpedo this thing. But if that doesn't happen, this movie is maybe one of the most encouraging things I've seen as a Christian in a long time that I can hand off to people who love it already and say, this is our vision of how, the genders relate to one another in a household.
I mentioned to you earlier that I think that her character carries the movie, and she probably has more face time on the screen, right?
Oh, I don't know, maybe.
I'm not sure, but it seems like maybe just watching her struggle with the animal when she's in labor and through that whole process, she gets a lot of screen time. And then she's the only adult left standing at the end, and so she, in a lot of ways, could be argued to be the hero of the movie. And again, it could be argued, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of what the husband does, right? It's not like, well, he wouldn't do it, and so I do.
It comes as a product of what he does,
right? And so it's not pitted against what her husband chooses to do. In fact, it's probably only as a result of what he does, right? She wouldn't have to rise. I say a hero, I don't mean like the hero of the movie, but she is a hero, certainly. And so, but it's not, again, she's not having to, I'm just looking at what the stereotype is typically when men and women are portrayed. She's not having to compensate for him. She's not having to go and say, oh, silly, he always puts us in the wrong spot. And I knew right. And I saved the day because of that because of what he does, he has set her up well while he's alive, and he sets her up well even after he dies. I mean, he's certainly the hero. If he didn't give his life, they wouldn't be in a position to fight or to learn maybe how to take the monsters down. But even so, she doesn't take a passive role after that. I mean, he's a hero and she's a hero, and they're both allowed to be heroes, and neither of them has to do anything stupid. Neither has to make a mistake. Neither has to be wrong.
Neither has to do it by climbing on top of the other one in a denigrating way.
They don't have to compete. They don't have to fill any gaps for the other one. Although that in and of itself in marriage can be a very good thing, right? To complement each other that way. But you just don't see, you never see women failing to rise and their husbands compensating in media. You never see that. But you often see where the husband won't, he makes a mistake or he fails to rise, so the woman has to compensate, even in a comedic fashion. You often see that, and that's just entirely gone from this movie. And I think it gives the husband dignity and allows him to be a hero, and gives the wife dignity and allows her to be a hero as well.
Yeah, just to compliment, no pun intended, what you said there. He makes it possible for her to flourish in this way. And she, in turn, makes it possible for him to flourish in his way.
Well,
and that comes to a terminus when he gives his life. But the resources they make use of after that are things he has provided. They have a safe place that she has made lovely.
Right.
They have he sacrificed himself not just in dying to get the monster's attention, but he had sacrificed himself prior to that by every night going down and working on a new version of a hearing aid.
Right.
So when they're down there, what he has built has prepared them for this future, and then she ably and competently steps into it. I just love for whatever word you can use, the synergy, synchronicity, the way that the two have worked like hand in glove to accomplish what's needful for their family.
Right. You'd mentioned that she allows him to flourish and he allows her to flourish. And she does so really literally by giving birth to their child, right? That she is an agent of growth in that way, while he's providing for her, that she continues to provide for their family, and that child being born.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you also earlier how much I loved that she didn't, I was waiting for this moment where you might, after you know that she's pregnant, I was waiting for this moment where you might get an idea of her quote unquote true feelings about that baby, that the baby would be a liability, that she really was mourning this baby.
We're all going to die.
We're all going to die. It's going to be the death of us. And you never see that. And so again, looking at how this movie really holds up traditional norms, I thought that it doesn't cast this baby in a light where it becomes a liability to the family. Although it does. is, right?
But that actually kind of looks like an amplified version of what every child is. You know, a child coming in creates an incredible strain on a woman, on her body, on the family as they care for this new, very needy creature.
Right.
But it's fundamentally a source of joy.
Right.
And like this is the same story as every birth in every family. You know, at least in the sense of like a family who wants children and are bringing them in and whatnot.
Right.
It's writ so large and such a special setting that you're sort of highlighting.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to say the risk is emphasized, right? But you're right. There is always risk. New babies do take a lot of resources from everybody in the family, and of course here that's exacerbated. But you don't even get the impression that she's sort of begrudgingly going along with it. Like, well,
or putting a good face on it.
Right. That, I do like my children and okay, this will be another one. But she's even, making, when she makes that mobile and hangs it up, she's not just providing in really practical ways, like, let me figure out how this baby won't kill us, but she's providing in normal ways that a mother would. And
aesthetically, she's making a beautiful place for her family.
Right.
And, we tend to see aesthetics as superficial and whatnot, but it's not. And it's distinctly, let me caveat this a bit. It's fine for a man to make a lovely place. Men are gifted in that way. But a woman sort of more essential to her calling as caregiver for her family, one of the things she does is make the place lovely.
Right.
And so she's making the place lovely in that mobile. That to me was also a very powerful scene when they hang that mobile.
Right. As somebody who studies civilization, we know that a people can only turn to things like aesthetics when there is an absence of war, when there's safety, when there's surplus, right? And so you see the Greeks were able to work on things like democracy and art and architecture during times of peace, right? And so what you have in this movie, this is not a time of peace. This is a time of a kind of war. They're very much in survival mode. And even so, her husband has helped create for them an opportunity where she can build a kind of culture that moves beyond basic survival. So there's definitely, I'd say the majority of their resources are toward basic survival, but they can play games in the evening. That is something, even game playing is a result of leisure time. And you only have leisure time when you're not constantly fighting for survival.
Even education, when she's educating
absolutely.
him, that depends on an amount of leisure time.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you noticed, I happened to catch the quote that was on the chalkboard behind. I don't know if you did.
I was trying to read it, but like her head was in the way.
Right. It was a Shakespeare sonnet. And so, just this little allusion to what we consider to be cultivated cultural things. Shakespeare is really probably an impractical thing to learn when you're trying to fight monsters and hide from them, right? And yet that's the kind of thing that they're pursuing. And it was marked, the poetry was marked on the board, the meter and the syllabication. So who learns poetry when you're fighting monsters? I just really love that juxtaposition. And even in the math, she mentioned something about him needing to divide. And you think, well, just learn some super basic math. What do you have to know? And so I don't know if that's like a hope for a future civilization, or because you had mentioned that, hopeful people bear children, right? And whether this was intentional or not. But I appreciated that Shakespeare Shakespeare always lives. He can't be killed.
Well, this is not nearly as serious as a point as you're making, but it's funny you note that, because in my head, I was thinking every kid's complaint about math is, when am I ever going to use this?
Right.
And no kid in the world has ever had as much of a valid criticism on that
Except
point.
that boy. Yeah.
And that boy.
Or poetry. You can say the same thing about poetry. What is this for? Why do I have to learn this stuff?
Yeah.
And I appreciated that. I don't know, of course, I don't know if that's her decision or his decision in the movie, but they're still continuing to pursue and have again, going back to the point that he has created an opportunity to pursue something like poetry if they had wanted. And I like that. It's good stuff.
Well, to maybe put a bow on this part of it, that scene is juxtaposed with him teaching the son as well.
Right.
And it goes back to your earlier point about how both of these characters, they exhibit a lot of the same virtues.
Mm-hmm.
They just do it in ways that are distinctly masculine or feminine.
Right.
So it's not particularly masculine to go fishing, but the sense of like, I need to train you to be able to provide for a family.
Right.
Our family, or again, in the future. Or I need to train you to thrive as a human.
Right.
through mathematics and culture. They're both doing it, but they're doing it in a way that actually reflects something that's unique to them as gendered beings.
Absolutely. And he doesn't, so they're going fishing. There's nothing that a woman couldn't have done. It's not like
and a man can teach math.
Absolutely. It's not like he needed to be super strong or he didn't have to scale, a cliff, but she's pregnant. And so it doesn't make sense for her to be out on slippery rocks, right? And, risking even a fall or something like that. So I just appreciate that it presents this view of gender roles. It's not about, so I think we have this idea that just because women can, we should, right? As a culture.
You mean?
If we can work, we should work, right? If we, I don't know anything really that because we're equal and we haven't always.
If you can be a mixed martial arts fighter,
absolutely,
you should be.
Right. If that women should pursue the things that women in history haven't always been able to pursue. And I appreciate the choice, but I think sometimes we feel pressured that you have to do this thing because you can, right? Like if you can earn multiple degrees, you should. And I appreciate this movie presents a picture of gender roles in such a way where she can do those things. We see that right by the end of the movie. I'm convinced that if she needed a fish, she would, right? But that she doesn't because at the end of the day, it's not always practical. And I
still think this is not really rooted though in the practical. Like I get the sense that they're speaking to something that's more fundamental to, it's really hard to pin down what is fundamentally masculine and what's fundamentally feminine. And there's a lot of variation on this theme. You're right, it's practical here. But I do think the sense of going to meet the future and preparing to deal with what the future brings is sort of distinctly masculine in the way he goes out from the household to do that.
Right.
I think preparing to meet the future in the way that she cultivates a home for the people to live into the future is more distinctly feminine.
Preparing for a future child.
Or this child she's teaching now to be a man who knows how to access the world through mathematics. I think it's more than just practical, although it's rooted in that, or at least it certainly acknowledges that.
Right.
It's saying something sort of, I don't want to say platonic, but reaching for the ideal, you know what I mean? In a more essential way.
Right, yeah. I mean, woman is the life giver and man at times, if needed, to be a life taker, right? Which I think is why she's not the one who's actively out there where the creatures might find her. She's pouring into that life-giving role, right? Of growing the child and caring for children.
I guess I'm thinking of it as more that the masculine role is the explorer provider and the woman is the cultivator provider.
Right.
They're probably not thinking on that level, but I think probably also they can't help but play with those things when they want to tell a story about a rich household.
Right.
So anything else you want to say about femininity in this?
Probably, but nothing.
Nothing's pressing.
Nothing.
What did you think about it as a movie?
It was a great movie.
It was a great movie.
It was a great movie. Yeah.
Great use of sound.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how I did see an article headline, I'm not read it yet, where they intentionally chose to cast an actress who was deaf. And that daughter character, she's such a rich character. She's not just a token deaf girl who has to be accounted for, but she has agency. She's out moving through the world.
I thought as a scary movie, just telling a scary movie, I appreciated that there's some action, although really tragic early on, right, with the youngest son. And so you sort of expect that a movie like this will have a lot of tension that builds and builds and builds, but there's something pretty devastating right from the outset. And then the tension builds and, it still continues to build and build and build. And I went in thinking, I don't know if we'll see creatures. I don't know if, probably they'll be revealed towards the end. And that wasn't really the case.
You get them right up front.
Yeah. And it wasn't less scary for that. I think sometimes by the time you see the monster at the end of the movie, like there's nothing else to be afraid of, right? But they show you the monster early on and you're still really terrified.
Yeah, we were in the theater when I watched it, apart from you. There were some friends from high school who were there that hadn't seen in a while. So we were talking before and after. And one of them said the most intense part of that movie is that opening scene in the drugstore where you're like, gosh, it is super serious. These people be quiet. That's clear. Right. Good acting. I would say when she's being stalked about to give birth was more tense for me.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that is one of the most intense. And what that opening scene does, it doesn't just do this. It gives you emotional gravitas is one of the things it does. But it tells you that their care to be quiet is just as important as it appears to. That appears to be.
Yeah.
That the threat is that serious.
That's true. Yeah. I guess I knew the premise of the movie, but I also, some things there in the store, I thought, what are they going to do? Come right away? Is there no time to run and hide? Do you have no contingency plan for what happens if someone does make a noise? And that's good. That was a good plot device to teach you. No, really, it's very severe. You have seconds possibly. And then I appreciated too.
The margin is so thin,
right,
that it could be a matter of 3 steps between life and death.
Although, I wonder this a few times, if the margin is that thin, would my children be allowed to like roam free around the property? Even just in a store, would I be taking that? Like, would we be leaving ever at all, or would I keep them? Would I keep them in this one spot where I knew? That raised a question for me. What else was I
Well, I guess let's finish it up by talking about it as a scary movie. Did this movie scare you?
It did scare me.
I normally think jump scares are the second cheapest way to get scare out of a horror movie. I think the lowest hanging fruit, the least sophisticated, the least valuable is buckets of gore.
Right.
One step up from that is just have something dart across the screen unexpectedly.
Something surprising.
But man, the jump scares in this were great.
They were really good.
The noise helps.
Yeah.
That you're silent. Channel my inner Brick Tamlin. Loud noises, it really ramps things up.
Right.
But some of the stuff, they're playing with you emotionally. So I'm thinking about the scene where the daughter has realized the red lights are on while she's out at the grave site they've made for the little boy who got killed, the brother got killed. She sprints back to the farm. She realizes there's a light in the cornfield, and she's looking down there trying to figure it out. Well, they raise the tension because this is the first time her deafness has been seen as an actual additional threat to her safety, because this monster comes out behind her, and we know he's hearing her.
Yeah, she's not
hearing him, and her visual senses aren't attuned to him. So they bring you to that point, but then they let it drop because the monster goes his own way. But then right after that, you have the hand reach out of the corn and grab her.
Right, just her little brother.
Up and down really fast.
Right.
You're on a roller coaster.
Yeah, and I appreciated too that I remember thinking early on in the movie, there's going to be one big scene where there's a big noise and that things really escalate, but it doesn't work up to that one scene, right? So you have a lot of those scenes, and then you also, right, like you come in contact with the monsters kind of frequently throughout the movie, but then you also have interspersed scenes where noise is made and no monsters come, which is almost as tense as when the monsters do arrive, because you're not really sure. Mm-hmm. And so I liked how it really keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, it's super.
Whether the monsters are on screen or not, I think it's almost not about the monster so much as it's if they'll arrive.
Yeah. Well, all right. We think everybody will watch this movie. If you can handle violence, you can handle the tension of horror. Christian, I would say go watch this one.
Yes, go see it. I don't even like scary movies, and I thought this one was fantastic.
Yeah. All right. That sounds like a great way to put a bow on this little addendum to our normal podcast. So thanks for listening to the bonus material, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.